Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton.
And I'm your co-host, Delnaz Kazemi.
And today we are 2 weeks out from the presidential election on November 5th. Delnaz, how are you feeling?
Stressed, excited, a mix of emotions. How about you?
Same here, same here. Yeah, we are at the end of an incredibly crazy election cycle. We had the change in candidates. We had, a situation where we thought Donald Trump was going to win easily for a long time. Then Kamala Harris entered the race. She changed everything. She's run an impressive campaign with a great VP nominee, Tim Walz, and now we're in a place where, according to 538, the race is going to be decided by roughly a single point nationally, with ties in almost all of the swing states. Right now, we see that Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan collectively are all tied races. This election could not be closer at all levels of government. Elnaz, what are you getting from these polls, and do you believe that this race is as close as it seems?
Good question. And I've been listening to I mentioned this right before we start, a lot of podcasts where people are dissecting these polls. And there are some individuals, analysts, who say we shouldn't believe these polls, that it's so close. I don't think anyone's saying it's going to be a landslide, but they're saying no, Harris is much higher in reality. These polls aren't reflecting. But I don't know. I'm scared to say either way. Um, and obviously, looking at this 1 point difference freaks me out so much. And in some ways, I think it encourages people to keep fighting rather than sitting back and being like, oh, for example, if Kamala Harris was 10 points, right, up, people wouldn't be as stressed, which sounds good, but it's really not because, as we know, we can't rely 100% on polls. They can't predict elections as accurately as people may think.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that kind of freaks Democrats out a lot of the time that, maybe I'm not as freaked out about right now is the fact that in 2020 and in 2016, obviously the polls were incredibly inaccurate in favor of Donald Trump. I don't think the same thing is happening this time. This is a very close race nationally, and the polling companies, 538, all the outlets have adjusted their predictions in these polls to reflect the fact that Trump drives out voters that don't traditionally turn out in a presidential race. So with accounting for that, I think, and just based on the vibes on the ground, we are in a very close race. So as you said, Delnaz, every single vote matters in every single state, but especially in those swing states, every single vote matters every hour. Phone banking, knocking on doors, letter writing, everything matters in these last, few days, 12
Right.
days
Yeah, I also want to
until
say, right,
election
go
day.
ahead. Um, for anybody assuming, for example, if you're on the left, if you're supporting Harris and you're within your circle, if everyone in your circle supports Harris, don't think that means Harris is going to win because there's still people beyond your circle who are undecided. Yes, of course, we know there are Trump supporters who are going to vote for Trump, but there are people who genuinely are undecided. They say, oh, I don't know as much. Oh, I don't know. Oh, they've done this that's bad, but I'm not sure about this. You need to talk to people beyond your circle because I can go on my Twitter right now, and I have plenty of friends who I know their views um, back and forth. We go talk about the policies, we agree on things, but that's not telling me who actually may win. That's just my circle. So go beyond your circle, talk to people who are undecided because there's a lot more than you think. And this is me speaking from personal experience. Not everyone has their views written down and secured. There are people who are going back and forth still.
Absolutely. And especially with our generation,
Yeah.
there is the group of people who are undecided about who to vote for. But there's also a bigger group of young people who are deciding in this moment whether or not to vote in the first place. And those voters are, I would say, even harder to move to either side than the voters who are truly undecided between a candidate right now, because they're disengaged in politics. And what we need to do right now is tell those voters that they matter, that their voices matter, and that no matter if they feel like they are if they like one of the candidates, or if they don't feel connected to one of the candidates, that every single election, unless, as I say, unless a young person decides to run themselves, every election is going to be a choice between two binary options. And in this election, the choices could not be more clear at the presidential level. But let's also talk about the Senate races right now. Although the swing states for the presidency are looking very close, Democrats seem to be leading by roughly 3 to 4 points in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, as well as Ruben Gallego's lead in Arizona, due to the nature of the Senate map looking very favorable to Republicans, who only need to pick up 2 seats to win the chamber. And that's not considering the fact that they are going to win West Virginia, which is currently held by Democrat Joe Manchin. This is all going to come down to the states of Montana and Texas, 2 states that are very difficult to win for Democrats, but Democrats still can pull off a victory in those places. Right now, Texas is looking like it's a 3-point race, and it's notable that Kamala Harris will be going down to Houston tomorrow to hold a rally
with Beyonce.
with Beyonce to try to juice up turnout down there and help Colin Allred win the Senate race. In Montana, the race has been changing more in the favor of Republicans, with Republican Tim Sheehy now leading by roughly 5 points, and that lead has been growing since July. Delnaz, with the Senate looking like it's going to be decided by Texas, how optimistic are you that Democrats will win the chamber and be able to confirm judges if Kamala Harris is elected to the presidency?
I'm glad you mentioned those states, especially Texas. I've been following Texas more than the other states you mentioned. And what's interesting to me, I really don't know what to expect from Texas these days. It takes me back to when O'Rourke ran against Cruz. And I'm getting similar vibes, as you said, with the race now. It seems closer than what I would have expected from Texas. And I could be wrong, but I feel that people in Texas, especially more moderates who are leaning towards Allred rather than Cruz, are localizing this election and kind of like separating it away from the presidential race, which is interesting to me because what I would expect or assume is that someone voting for Trump or someone who's a Republican, a hardcore Republican this day and age would go, straight down ballot Republican. But it seems like people are genuinely excited about not electing Cruz, even if they're more moderate or even Republicans. And I'm assuming it's similar with the other states, that it's almost become more local. Maybe that's optimistic, but it feels that way seeing from what people are saying, and that's fascinating to me.
In Texas, it's also interesting because a certain group of people, new Texas residents, are not necessarily the most likely to be polled. And since 2020, Texas has gained roughly 3 million new residents. That's about the size of Connecticut
Wow.
moving into Texas, who now will be probably voting in this presidential and Senate election. So, Texas is a real wild card. And, if Republicans can get up their turnout in rural places, and Democratic turnout is lower than it needs to be in cities, Texas is probably going red for the Senate race. But if Kamala Harris can get the turnout up from places like Houston, from Harris County, which is growing at a very fast pace, from kind of that blue spine area down from San Antonio up to Dallas, then it's a real toss-up, and Democrats have a real shot at maintaining the Senate through the state of Texas, which is something that Democrats probably wouldn't even have considered as a possibility just a few short years ago, before, as you said, Delnaz, Beto O'Rourke shocked the nation by losing by just under 3 points. The House of Representatives right now is also incredibly important for both parties, obviously, but this summer, as Joe Biden was receiving very negative polling data nationally, the House was seen as a chamber that could likely serve as a check on a potential Trump presidency. Now, it seems more likely than not that whatever presidential candidate wins the presidential race will also carry the House. And with the Senate looking more likely than other races to go Republican, it seems like there is a higher likelihood than previously that whichever party that if the Republicans win, then they'll have a trifecta and be able to enact some of their, crazy Project 2025 agenda pieces. So this is the stakes are really high. But a lot of races are going to come down in states that you wouldn't traditionally see as swing states. The House will likely be determined by California and New York. And lucky for Democrats, in New York, there are a number of races where Democrats seem likely to pick up. That Democrats seem likely to pick up in a race in part of Brooklyn and Long Island. Democrat Laura Gillen is leading by 12 points her Republican challenger, Anthony D'Esposito, and that trend seems to be similar in other close races around New York City, around that New York City area. So, those who are in New York and possibly listening to this, you can make a difference right near home in a what's traditionally a safe blue state.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and also I just want to say when I say local, I'm of course not saying like local elections when I compared the Senate races saying that they were becoming localized. I'm just putting that out there.
Mhm.
But I think it's the same thing for these House races that you can't, and I agree with you that it seems likely whoever wins the presidency will also win the House. But at the same time, possibly in certain races, you can't really judge the whole district on um, their political views. I'm not sure if that makes sense. But for example, if there's a Republican, a registered Republican, you really can't know for sure, maybe they are not voting at all. I'm not going to say they're voting for Trump because if they're voting for Trump, they're probably going to vote for the Republican, um, excuse me, candidate for the House as well. But let's say on the fence Republican who's not voting for Trump might end up voting for the Democrat for the House race. So you just don't know.
And I think one thing that's notable, just to shift the conversation a bit, in this election has been the massive gender gap that we've seen emerge across the country with women primarily being motivated by issues of abortion access, by social issues, whereas men are typically more motivated by issues around the economy. A recent Suffolk University poll from August of likely voters shows a 34% gender gap, with women supporting Harris 57% to 36% for Trump for a 21-point margin, and men supporting Trump 51% to 38% for Harris with a 13-point margin. And an Echelon Insights poll in September also found a 10-point gender gap, with women favoring Harris 54% to 43% for Trump for an 11-point advantage, and with men supporting 49% for Harris and 48% for Trump. This election will be decided by whether, women or men vote at higher rates and by how much they back their respective candidates. I've definitely seen personally in my own life, in my own communities, although I am in my, primarily Democratic bubble, I have seen more men shifting to more conservative views, whereas women are shifting left. Delnaz, have you seen a similar thing in your community?
100%. And I can't say I'm surprised looking at the past however many years, based on the rhetoric that either side have had. Um, One thing that's interesting is that the women who I notice are moving more left, or not even moving farther left, but becoming more passionate in their stance. They are the ones who are out there. They're going to, for example, vote for Harris. They know exactly what they're going to do. However, the men in my own personal life, anyway, who are possibly leaning more right, and these are the men that are a bit more like centrist, I suppose, than very hardcore Republican people I know. But they are still conflicted. They're not saying they're Trump supporters, but they're also saying they will clearly say they are moving towards the right. And I think the reason is because they may have women in their life who are explaining to them these policies will affect my life. This isn't just politics. This will affect my life. And it's understandable. I mean, it's not understandable why they're leaning right, but it's understandable why they're still on the fence. Like, even though they are shifting right, some that I know personally still aren't out there saying, I'm going to vote for Trump. Whereas the women that I know are possibly shifting left, they are out there saying they're going to vote for Harris because that is the candidate who's going to protect their rights. So that's fascinating to me. And of course, I didn't include, but yes, there are a sector of men who are absolutely voting for Trump. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist, but looking into my own personal bubble, that's what I noticed.
I notice obviously the same thing. And I do think that there is a crisis right now of engagement of men in not politics, because obviously politics, at least in the US, is primarily dominated by men holding higher office. But I think there's a lot of men in America right now who feel like they don't necessarily think politics is the way to advance their own personal interests anymore, especially around the economy. And largely that's because the economy is not something that politicians can really control that much, versus the fact that one's rights, one's freedoms, especially over their own body, that is a direct effect of who we elect into office. And the choice for a lot of women on those issues and some men could not be more clear, because Republicans have banned abortion in several states across the country, with many having no exceptions for things like rape or incest. These are fundamental rights that are being taken away, and they are intrinsically linked to the people we elect to office.
You just clearly described the reason for why the thing I described is happening, with the women being like very passionate versus the men, although leaning right, are still a little conflicted. So I think that explains it perfectly.
So in the last few days of the campaign, the Trump and Harris campaign strategies could really not be more different. Right now, Harris has done a bunch of media interviews. She hosted a CNN town hall, or she participated in a CNN town hall last night, notably on the night where the second presidential debate was supposed to happen and Donald Trump backed out. Harris also participated in a Univision town hall a few days ago, and has also been hosting rallies in a bunch of swing states as well as Texas, which will be focused on the issue of abortion rights in this election. Meanwhile, Trump has been not doing major interviews. He's been doing interviews on right-wing podcasts, on Fox News, but really not doing any hard-hitting questions, because his team knows that when he does, he doesn't perform well. Trump also has hosted a few rallies in the critical swing state of New York City. he he hosted a rally with Elon Musk a few days ago, where Elon Musk basically endorsed vigilante violence to, support the constitutional rights of the United States. And Donald Trump danced for 45 minutes at another event to Ave Maria.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Unfortunately,
so Delnaz, what do you think about these two diverging campaign
oh,
styles, and how do you think this is actually going to affect the race?
those are very two different things, which is sad because what I think is this. I see, and I'm truly trying to put myself in the shoes as someone who is not super partisan when I'm explaining this. When I see Harris's campaign, I see a candidate. I'm not even talking about what her policies are. I see a candidate who wants to move forward, whose campaign is positive, who makes me feel excited, who talks about the issues I care about, but also talks about the issues that maybe somebody in their 60s or 70s cares about. And it makes me want to vote for that candidate, even if I'm somebody who doesn't know the specific policies. It would interest me to go and look into that candidate's policies. When I look at Donald Trump's campaign, I see hate. Just like in bold letters, I'm imagining the words hate. It's just insult after insult. And this isn't new. I mean, he's been doing it ever since he got elected. Sorry, before he got elected the first time. Hate, insults, calling people names. I don't understand how people can be drawn to that. sometimes I think maybe it's the same reason why people are drawn to like very dramatic and bad reality TV. It's just that urge to like follow drama. I'm not really sure. We need a psychologist to come and explain that because I'm not an expert. And it just makes me feel awful. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see people being insulted and called names. However, when it comes to how I think it'll affect the election, that's a completely different answer because in normal times I would say, well, yeah, regardless of party, no one will be drawn to a campaign filled with hate. Nobody. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat. But these days, I truly, truly think that no matter what he says, no matter how many more insults he says, no matter how many people he name calls, that that's not going to be something that changes the election drastically. It should be, but it won't, and that's really upsetting.
And when we say this, I think we need to point out, like, we're not talking about the voters on the ground. We're not, making the deplorables comment that Hillary Clinton made back in 2016. We're saying that there is a candidate in Donald Trump who is, in fact, insulting his own voters
Yeah.
by believing that they will, accept whatever lie he throws at them. Like take cats and dogs for an example in the debate.
Mm-hmm.
He made that up. JD Vance and him made that up. And they are deceiving their voters and they think that their voters are stupid and will and that's not us, that's them.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's also notable Kamala Harris is welcoming people who have vast disagreements with her, who
Yes.
are, largely, to the right of her, onto her campaign and to support her campaign. She was campaigning with Liz Cheney, and over 100 Republicans in Pennsylvania a few days ago. And she went on Fox News with Brett Baer and had a very combative interview. But she is reaching out to people and is welcoming people into her movement. And Donald Trump is trying to, you know, lead a campaign just like you said, Delnaz, based on
Yeah.
hate, trying to
I
kick as many people out as possible.
I simply do not understand why it's so close. Oh, even just when it comes to what I just described, not even talking about
Mhm.
policy, but here we are. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, we have 2 more weeks to go.
Ah, haha.
Any any thoughts on if there'll be an October surprise?
I mean, I feel like there's been 50, but they're not really surprises. It's more just like, oh man, that like sucks, or man, that's crazy. And then we just move on because we've become so desensitized. So I don't know. Did it already happen? Is there one coming? I don't know. What about you?
I think we are in a time in our politics where only one side of the aisle can really have a surprise affect their campaign, which is the Democrats.
Yeah.
I don't think anything there's any information that could come out about Donald Trump, and this is sad to say, I don't think there's any allegations, any sort of criminal activity that could make 45% of the country not want to vote for Donald Trump.
Yep. I agree with you.
And I think there's absolutely a double standard because I think if there are many, many things that could harm Kamala Harris, that could harm a candidate like Joe Biden, that could harm, any other candidate. I mean, you just look at the Donald Trump rally a few days ago where he, stopped giving his speech and kind of danced around the stage. And then you compare that to the attacks that Joe Biden received for falling on his
Yes.
bike or something. And it's not comparable. There has not been a large rejection of Donald Trump based on clear signs that he is not up to the job. And I think that we're in a time where it's really notable that only one side of the aisle is able to is affected by negative news that comes out about them. So
Right. And that's what I meant. It's like you can throw the worst thing at him, but to the supporters, and again, I'm not trying to be insulting to them, but it's just another everyday thing and it just
mhm.
gets passed on. So,
And I think this is fundamentally an election about democracy, right?
yes, absolutely.
And in a democracy, what we do is we hold leaders accountable. if they do things that are wrong. One
Yeah.
side of the aisle, their politicians clearly don't believe in democracy because they are not willing to hold their leader accountable no matter what he does.
I was just gonna say one last thing, if you don't mind. This is what I tell people. I'm like, if there was a Republican and a Democrat, say I'm somebody who leans more Democrat, and the Democrat was doing all these things, I would seriously be like, you know what? And say that the Republican was very like decent and not extremist, I'd say, you know what? Country over party. I'm going to vote for the Republican so I have a presidential election to vote in 4 years. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, it's really not as much about policy now. Of course, it is in many aspects, such as reproductive rights and other things. But in some ways, like you said, it's about democracy. I don't know. I feel like for me, it would be really easy to put my party aside in a time like this. But
All right, that's our show for this week. Thank you for listening to Pod Save the Youth, and we'll hopefully update you one more time before the election and come back with a few episodes recapping the results.
oh, thank you, everyone.